Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S6 and see how this specific phone holds up in 2023. Now, I will definitely tell you this phone is not worth buying at all anymore. It's not even worth considering to buy. You are much better off buying something like a Samsung Galaxy S20 or S21 or Galaxy S20 FE, S21 FE, one of those types of phones. This one just doesn't make any sense to, buy anymore. It's been unsupported with software for many years. The hardware is kind of outdated internally, so just don't even buy this phone. But if you want to buy some phones I would recommend buying this year, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Galaxy S6, this phone originally came out in 2015, and there were two different models of the Galaxy S6 if you remember. There was the S6, then there was the S6 Edge. And this was probably one of Samsung's biggest upgrades they've ever made from one phone to the other. Probably not even for the best things possible. So this was kind of considered by a lot of people a huge misstep. It was a step in a really weird direction, but it brought a lot of cool things that I'm really happy Samsung kind of brought back with their Android phones, which I'm really happy about. But this was a moment. If you remember in 2015 when this phone came out, tons of people hated this phone, but there was a lot of good to kind of come out from the Galaxy S6 as well. So on the front, you had a 5.1-inch Super AMOLED display. It was a 1440p panel, and even now in 2023, this panel still looks amazing. It is a very good screen, probably at that moment the best Samsung display Samsung's ever made. Even beyond this, even the S7's display, it was good too, but there was something about the Galaxy S6 coming from the Galaxy S5. This phone was just on a completely other level. And you have to remember during this moment too, basically all Android phones were notorious of kind of being stereotyped as being cheap, plastic phones, and iPhones were so much more premium. Well, Samsung kind of took that to heart and they really fixed it on this specific device, which was amazing. And the display, best display ever, still looks really good for sure. Now on the bottom, you basically had your home button, which is a very interesting thing. You had your capacitive keys to the sides of it. Then you had the front camera on the front, and it's a pretty good looking display. I still think it looks pretty good. Definitely looks beautiful, for a 2015 device. On the bottom, you had your micro USB port, and you had a headphone jack on this phone too, which was awesome. But this was basically Samsung's first misstep. They removed the micro SD card slot on this phone. Now, the problem with that was that Samsung, they should have kept the micro SD card slot. The reason why they removed it, I think mostly was to have people kind of upgrade storage rather than, being able to just buy the base phone. That way Samsung makes more money. But the thing that they really didn't consider here was that, the biggest, point people would pick up Samsung phones during that time was the micro SD card slot and the removable battery, which we'll get into in a second. And they basically removed both of those things with this phone, which made no sense at all. I think they tried to think of short term, how can we make the most money? And it didn't really work out that well. The phone after this, they did bring back the micro SD card slot, which they removed again with the S21, which that time it kind of felt okay. To be honest, I was still mad about it, but with the S6, this was way too soon. I had no idea what they were thinking there. But on the back, they did give us, again, such a premium feeling design. It was a flat back, the camera protruded just a little bit. You had wireless charging on this phone. The glass back still feels so good. It's crazy that this phone is 8 years old now, because it just doesn't even feel like it, to be honest. You had wireless charging, IP certification. You had a very, very good looking phone here, which was amazing. So the takeaway, basically, Samsung brought the most premium phone they've ever built, the best feeling phone they've ever built. Unfortunately, they brought basically they removed the micro SD card slot and the battery, which was not good. Now in the camera department, this was also another very good asset of this phone. So on the back, you had a 16 megapixel wide angle camera, which you could do 4K video on at 30 frames per second, which is pretty much in line to basically what phones were doing at that time. And on the front, you had a 5 megapixel wide angle camera that could do 1440p videos. So this was a pretty solid sensor during that moment. Again, 2015, you had the iPhone 6s that came out that year too, and that basically did 4K at 30 and 1080p, maybe 720p on the front. Either or, this camera definitely was up there, and it was a very, very good camera during that moment, which was honestly very cool. Now with this specific model, I would say the only thing it's lacking compared to phones nowadays, well, there's a lot. There's no 4K at 60 on the front or the back. There's no multiple cameras. But I will still say for a phone from back then, it is kind of understandable. Now another thing with this phone you have to remember is that basically the camera itself, although it was really good in the stock camera app, still in other applications like Snapchat and all those ones, Still the same exact issue, the camera quality wasn't that great, but I will still tell you, the S6 camera in this day and age is still pretty decent. I mean, for how old this phone is, clearly it's not that great, but for how old this phone is, it's kind of impressive. So from that perspective, that kind of covers it up there. Now on the software side, this phone's unsupported. It's been unsupported for many, many years now. And online it says it stopped at Android 8. I'm pretty sure it stopped at Android 7, if I'm not mistaken. But either or, this phone has been unsupported for many, many years now. But if you remember, and you guys probably don't because nobody probably watched this video. Actually, it did get like few views, which was pretty impressive. I custom ROM'd my Galaxy S6 back in 2020, and I was able to install I forget what Android version, probably Android 9 or maybe it was Android 10 during that moment. And it was actually a very decent custom ROM. I was able to root it, I was able to custom ROM it, and it was a very, very decent experience, which makes me think that if you were able to custom ROM a Galaxy S6 and install even Android 12 on it, with the hardware inside, you could probably get a decent experience. And it really kind of shocked me. Now, clearly it wouldn't be a software I would recommend buying, or installing anymore. And it may have been like such a weird ROM. It was a custom ROM, not even from that big of a developer, but it was still very interesting that there was a development community even in 2020 when this phone was 5 years old. And even now, I'm sure there is like an Android 11 ROM, maybe even an Android 12, maybe even an Android 13 ROM available on this phone. This is one of the last Samsung phones I can remember that is able to be rooted and custom ROMmed. I think the S7 and S8, maybe some models of those phones are able to be done, but this one, I was able to do it on a random model, which was awesome. So keep that in mind as well. Now from the performance side, this phone had that Exynos 7420 octa chipset inside with 3 gigabytes of RAM. Now I kind of thought that at that time the performance of this phone was pretty decent, but over time phones, they tend to age depending on the chipset inside. They either age really well or really bad. And I think this phone aged in the middle of the road. I feel like the Galaxy S8 aged up better than what this phone aged up even like during the same moment in time. So I feel like during this moment, again, they were using, I guess, their own built-in chipsets in-house, and I've heard horror stories of those ones. I never really heard too many complaints about the performance of this phone during, the maybe first year or two, but definitely over time, because of the software here, these phones just get bogged down with the software. With Samsung experience, with TouchWiz, it is not a great experience, and I'm so happy they moved over basically to One UI because that is a much better version of software than this thing. So again, it's just another one of those things you have to keep in mind here. The performance is just not even the biggest reason not to buy this phone. Even the performance isn't that great, but it wouldn't be the reason why I wouldn't buy this phone. The main reason why I wouldn't buy this phone anymore is because of the software. It's just not a good version of software. It's been unsupported for many, many years, and there's no reason to buy a phone like this. It's like unsecure, the performance isn't that great, the battery life isn't that great, and you're much better off buying even a Galaxy S10e, which probably costs like $130 now. You are much better off buying a phone like that over this specific phone, and the S10e isn't even supported with software that much either anymore. So if I were you, if you have, if you're trying to get the best value, phone in general, the best thing you can do is probably buy a Galaxy S21 in the used market. If you find one with some scratches on it or whatever, that is probably going to cost you about $200 to $300 depending on the condition. That would make a lot of sense to buy. If you can buy S20, go for it, but the S21 would be the one I would recommend. I would not recommend buying this phone at all anymore. So that pretty much covers it up. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.